Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Belgian, but I happen to work in Tate Modern, and I prepared a couple of hopefully key ideas to think and rethink the very notion of creativity in this new society. Behind me you will see images, you will see them a couple of times, and at the end, hopefully it will be much clearer for you why these images are there. So let's start with rethinking the notion of creativity. The magic word these days is creativity. And not just for artists, managers and policymakers alike demand creativity. Even therapists and mediators urge us to find more creative solutions. Nowadays, creativity is all about a positive morality, yes, even about a positive economy. We expect nothing but good from creativity, also economical gain. But what remains of the meaning of the word creativity when just everybody is using it? And where does this hunger for creativity come from? Isn't it instead a sign for a loss of true creativity? We must be grateful to thinkers as the Belgian sociologist Pascal Gielen, to James Quilligan, to Ario Klamer, to the Italian law professor Ugo Mattei, and especially the Italian philosopher Paolo Virno, for helping us to understand the very meaning, the organization, and maybe even a form of new governance of creativity. The joke, says Paolo Virno, is the basic empirical form of creativity. A joke is like a diagram of creative action. The joke is, of course, a narrow acceptation of creativity, but at least a joke helps us to understand how creativity works. Jokes demonstrate how a specific situation can be approached with completely different rules. And if the norm is the measure, the joke is a form of dismeasurement, of transgression. With jokes, nothing is either necessary or impossible. Everything that is can also be otherwise. Jokes also make clear that there are many different ways of handling the norm. So true creativity also includes the weapon of criticism. One has to step aside or outside the stream to look at things from a distance. Creativity, the joke, demonstrates the variability of reality and thereby its relativity. With the joke, reality is understood as just one possible reality beside many others, offering a brief escape from the rule of measure, even if only mentally. And this mental possibility of stepping aside, of taking a distance, of an exodus, of looking at oneself in relation to the norm or the rule, is the primary condition for creativity. It shouldn't come then as a surprise that various thinkers referred to the importance of so-called asocial, unsocial behavior as a precondition for creativity. And if we take these characteristics of creativity seriously, we immediately understand that the creative industries understood as an instrumentalization of culture, together with creative capitalism and neoliberalism, are talking about something completely else when using the word creativity. Capitalism and neoliberalism do like risks, but no jokes. They are fearful of doing things really differently. That is why it is suspicious of those who take a distance, who go for exodus. Capitalism and neoliberalism do not like this. They are afraid to discover the mistake, its own faux pas, because capitalism and neoliberalism, they install mechanisms of control beforehand. We don't know that the current financial crisis is based on an exceptional amount of creativity. But it's just an imaginary form of creativity, and when this sort of creativity reaches reality, and when the real hits this sort of creativity, like in 2008, then we have a real disaster. And what's the effect? It's not liberating, but it's disastrous. And what do? We introduce even more rules, but the norms do not change. So where is the creativity? We could therefore call this imaginary creativity of capitalism and neoliberalism creativity stripped of its critical potential. No more jokes, unless they can instantly be turned into a profit. And this travel ban, no exodus, ensures that individuals can do anything but push and pull a little within the boundaries of this neoliberal culture. Creative capitalism has no other aim than to disrupt the dialectics between culture and creativity. Indeed, there is a lot of culture which does not have a direct economical impact. Creative capitalism also disrupts the dialectics between civic society and creativity. Civic society understood as a set of collective structures based on social security. Think, for instance, about steady jobs and permanent positions. With creative capitalism, these are things of the past. And at the extreme, with creative capitalism, the difference between labor and leisure is gradually disappearing. Guaranteed positions, our wages, are constantly put on hold. We are constantly in the waiting room. And worldwide, the creative sector seems to be cultivating such a labor ethos that plays right into the hands of neoliberalism. In the ocean of so-called creative projects, creating untenable expectations, think about the internship crisis, sustainability and commitment will be always partial and temporary. Nomadic creative people are not only physically flexible, but socially and, hélas, mentally as well. After all, network relationships do not easily build a memory. Put simply, creativity becomes disengaged. The creative worker no longer has to take a position, or rather, he or she is no longer obliged to hold a position. The temporary creative worker is lured into the job by the promise of the next job and the hope for a better economical mean. But this is a carrot, this is an illusion. Because the economic value, or mean, is no longer linked to the cultural mean. Or rather, the cultural mean leads often to a form of self-exploitation. Enthusiasm as a form of self-exploitation. And another level, the dismantling of the economical mean in the form of unheard financial wealth and excessive poverty does not generate a similar division in a cultural and intellectual sense. There, the average rules. Economical value and cultural value have parted ways. The enormous concentration of financial wealth and power lead even to a bigger and bigger divide between the few who can do whatever they like with an enormous amount of things they have, and those who want to do things with the things they don't have. Mostly they only have a few. And this is sucking them into the middle ground. The cultural irreverence of much of the visual art of today is mainly due to this. The more unequal the world gets, the better it is for the art market. But the massive increase in economical significance of artworks is not the same, and is not the same increase and significance in the cultural meaning of the same objects. And this is a great example of the predatory relationship of the private to the commons. The private sector lurks as a specter of the commons and appears during opportune moments to exploit common goods. Indeed, these artworks, they are not cultural objects, they are assets. The conflict is now between those who treat culture as a good from which to profit, and those who not only view but participate in cultural production as a collective process and a common endeavor. And these oppositionals and irreconcilable understandings of culture as a good versus a collective process are calling for a new form of politics. A form of politics which is based on solidarity, which goes beyond moral and legal obligations. A politics which is formed on trust. Only then we can learn again to appreciate the immaterial good of culture. Cultural goods are precisely cultural because they build off previous work. The word culture is related to cultivation, which expresses directly the idea of improving what is currently there. And this depends entirely on the legal regime that governs the good, and this regime is in the first place political, and only in the second place technical, and only in the third place economical. The first thing we have to do is to prevent a predatory private exploitation of taking place, preserving the cultural goods for public benefit and free participation. In those countries where public benefit and free participation is the highest, where public benefit and free participation in culture is the highest, citizens are the happiest and the healthiest. And of course, happiness and health is a true condition, is a main condition for a positive economy. And it is sad, because it is said, that countries with the lowest form of free participation in culture are the following: Greece, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and Hungary. Their participation in culture is the lowest. So we need a legal framework which inverts the general idea accepted in law that the legal regime should define the nature of cultural goods, with the idea that the cultural goods are not just a thing but a process and art of wealth production, and therefore should define the appropriate legal regime. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the very idea behind the commons. And I see culture as a common. Common goods represent the shift from the ownership by a subject over an inanimate object to the relationship between a community and resource and the role the resource plays in society. And therefore, the new report of the European Community Guidelines for a Creative Europe 2014-2020 is utterly wrong. The European Community, in difference with the report of 2002, now suddenly describes and prescribes cultural value as an economical asset, as a form of economical growth. Indeed, we need new guidelines in our own long-term self-interest. Guidelines which are based on the idea of solidarity as expressed by Jürgen Habermas, for instance, in his critique of Europe and the European community as it goes. What we need is guidelines to understand and to work with culture as a common good, as a form of being together. Indeed, creativity is not the capacity or an ability of one person or individual persons. Creativity is always a social process and depending on local situations. So I completely agree with Alain Badiou that in order to rethink culture as a common good, we have to realize concrete relationships with local political experiences. It's a necessity to create a common space starting with local experiences, where people who know something can meet people who know something else, performing together the I know and I don't know in the key of taking care. Culture, like environment, health and education, is a right accessible to all and owned by no one. It's a resource. Therefore, the existing categories of public and private impoverish the possibilities of governing culture. The former, public, is seen as the realm of the state and citizens. The latter, private, is the realm of the market and private property. All of politics is framed by this axis, public-private, casting us as for or against. For or against the market, for or against the state. Today, the idea of public versus private is a distinction without a difference. They are locked in a symbiotic alliance. Virtually everyone recognizes the difference between private and public goods. Yet the differences between two basic forms of collective property are often blurred: public goods and common goods. And the simplest way of contrasting a public and common good is to ask, does this particular resource require management as a social mandate, or is it an expression of a social mutuality and collaboration? In other words, is this property best maintained by government or the public? The commons are based on inclusion and access. Commons, unlike private goods, are not commodities and cannot be reduced to the language of conventional ownership. They express a qualitative relationship. Cultural goods, ladies and gentlemen, are exceptional and therefore easier to distinguish from other goods. They are exceptional because of the conventions, because of the conversations that make them cultural goods. Conversations. They are discursive and social constructs. We need a common sense, recognizing that each individual's survival depends on its relationship with others. As such, our well-being is inseparably linked to culture. Without culture, we have even less. Only when we firmly believe in this, we can step outside of enforced creativity. That is, we are able to forget the fetish of creativity and to understand what true creativity stands for, namely as a potential. Creativity as the key of taking care. Our ambition for Tate Modern in London is to address these kind of issues and offer art and artistic agency as a catalyst for new ideas that aim to create change. An art movement for the world in the 21st century and a place that seeks to address vital, complex, intimate and global questions of the kind that Google can't answer. Thank you very much.